So we've just completed the first biomechanical analysis in this presentation, that is the biomechanics of forward bending. And now we're going to do a live workshop to illustrate these points. I want to caution you that we are looking at individual postures in these posture workshops, but we're not practicing them in balanced sequences. In Viniyoga principles, we never practice asanas in isolation. They're always done in relation to each other for the sake of adequately warming the body up and preparing the body, and for the sake of compensating for the inevitable stress no matter how warmed up we are. Later in this course, we're going to have a presentation on the detail of the art and science of sequencing. So if you're watching these biomechanical workshops, I caution you to be very careful if you want to apply them in your own body. If you're going to, don't go into far range of motion, and wait until you're doing a full and balanced sequence to explore these ideas more deeply. So having spoken about the biomechanical principles of forward bend, we're going to take a look at it in real time with a live model. I do want to say one thing first. There are different strategies in asana practice that are available all around the planet today. What I'm presenting is very specifically from the perspective of this teaching lineage, and what we're going to be looking at is the primary intention of the postures and how to move into them, what we call origin of movement, in such a way as you get that primary intention. And then, of course, what we call release valves, the ways we avoid getting that intention and how to adjust so that the intention is achieved. Now, I want to say up front that some of what you'll see that I will call a release valve may be the very way that you are practicing. So please understand that what I'm sharing with you is this teaching lineage that flows from Krishnamacharya through Deskachar to myself. We have our own view about this, and it's in relation to achieving very specific effects. It doesn't mean that other ways of doing the posture are right or wrong. They're just different. And be clear that the reason we're doing it this way is to achieve specific functional benefits that are defined by the tradition as the primary purpose, in this case, of forward bending. So first we're going to look at a very classic, quote, Viniyoga posture called Cakravakasana. Often in public workshops, I call it the un-cat-cow, because in cat-cow, what we're doing is on the inhale, rotating the pelvis forward and arching the lumbar spine, and on the exhale, rounding the thoracic spine. Maybe, Julie, you can show. This is a kind of a classic cat-cow as it's seen out there in the public today. And there's some benefit to that, certainly. Cakravakasana is not cat-cow, it's different. Why I call it un-cat-cow is on exhale, rather than rounding the upper back, we're going to have Julie round her lower back. And then on inhale, rather than rotating the pelvis forward and further arching the lumbar spine, she's going to focus on lifting her sternum away from her navel and beginning to flatten her upper back. So although when she does that inhale, the lumbar spine will arch a bit, she's not trying to block that, but she's certainly not trying to exaggerate it. So I'm going to go give some cues to you guys who are watching as Julie performs this posture. So on inhale, Julie's going to traction with her hands, lift her sternum away from her navel, and attempt to stretch in the front of her body, in the belly. Notice where her lumbar spine is. Now, Julie, can you rotate your lumbar even more forward intentionally? So that's more what people do in cat-cow. So notice that she's not doing that. Come back to neutral, please. So now from neutral, I'm going to have Julie show you what we are trying to do on inhale. Remember what we're not trying to do. Go ahead one more time. Rotate your pelvis forward. Many of us do that. I'm not saying it's bad, but that's not what Cakravakasana is about. So come back to neutral. Rather than about the low back, the inhale action is about flattening the upper back. And to give you a cue, or Julie a cue, I'm putting my finger at the heel of her hand as a reference. And what I'm going to ask her to do in a moment is, as she inhales, she's going to traction like she's trying to, as if she's trying to push my hand backwards. And as she inhales, then she's going to draw her shoulder blades towards each other as she flattens her upper back. Okay, Julie, please. So what you can see is there's a little bit more arching, but she's focusing on this flattening and a stretching in the front of her belly. Now on exhale, rather than rounding her low back, she's going to move her hips backwards and now round her low back, lower her chin, bend her elbows, and she's stretching her low back. And I'll even refine this for her a bit. Inhale, come forward. Pull back on the heel of your hand, stretch the front of your body. Listen to the timing. As you exhale, move the hips backwards. Now round the lower back. Now bend the elbows. Slow down. You see now her lower your chest further. Her shoulders are lower than her hips, and this gives maximum stretching in her low back. What she's looking for is this feeling of stretching in her low back. So let's come forward again. On inhale, lifting here, stretching the front of the body. On exhale, move the hips backwards, round the low back, bend the elbows, round it more, lower the chin. So she's intentionally stopped, rotating her pelvis backwards. That facilitates the stretch of these erector spina muscles. One last time on your own. She comes forward, she stretches in the front. She's focusing on that feeling of stretching the front, flattening her upper back. Exhale back, rounding the low back, bending the elbows, lowering the chin, stretching the low back. This is Cakravakasana. Now come back to neutral, please. What I want to show you is common sort of release valves. Also, part of it isn't just a release valve, it's understanding. And some people have been trained to do things in a particular way. And so part of our job, when it's useful, is to change the way they are doing these postures. So what I'm going to have Julie attempt to do, and of course she's trained in Viniyoga, so it's hard for her to do it in what we think is an incorrect way, but I'll try and have her demonstrate more common ways we see people doing this posture. The first one is, as she's going back, she's just hinging from her hips and nothing's happening in her spinal curve. She just kind of goes straight back, and very little happens in the spinal curves. That's on the exhale. Come forward on inhale. And the second one is that she doesn't bend the elbows. She keeps her arms straight and it goes into her upper back. So although it's not as rounded as cat-cow, it's mostly in her upper back and there's very little happening here. So let's see it the correct, what we call the correct way. As she moves the hips backwards, she actively rounds her lower back as she bends her elbows. And then stop for a minute. You see her shoulders are lower than her hips. And that's what creates the stretch. And then you can go further down. Now, on the inhale, another thing that people do is they pivot from their hips and arch their low back as they come up. And you can see that well in her body. And we don't want to do that either. As she goes, go ahead down a correct way again. Round the low back. Now, as you come forward, really focus on, like you're doing Bhujangasana, as if you're lying on your stomach, lifting your chest off the floor. Come forward, here, and here, and here. So there's a flattening here. As she goes back, she's rounding here and bending the elbows and lowering the chin. So when you see her coming forward, there's a little bit of a back bend component on the inhale out of the forward bend. Lifting the sternum, go ahead, lifting the sternum up and away from the chest. Okay, so this is Cakravakasana. And we picked this first for forward bending. You can sit on your knees for a moment, please. Because that same theme is present in all the other forward bends, that the exhale controls the pelvic lumbar relationship in such a way that you maximize stretching the low back without compressing in the front. The inhale has got a back bend component, like you're lifting your sternum away from your navel.